Hey everybody, welcome to U13-L2, What is Imperialism? So learning target, you're going to describe European imperialism, explain the effects on interactions with colonized people in Africa and Asia. As you watch the Ed puzzle, answer the questions that pop up. Answers or questions I'll ask you today will be in blue text. Follow along with your study guide. Important concepts like vocab words will be in red text. And of course, if you have any questions, email me or come to office hours. So, my first question for you is what do you know about imperialism? Or what do you think of when you hear the word imperialism? All right, so just a heads up, this unit does talk about some deep topics like slavery, which I know we talked about last unit, genocide, and human mutilation. Some pictures might be graphic, but I'll attempt to give you a heads up if they are, and let me know if you have any questions. So, imperialism. This is the idea of one country takes over another territory in order to exploit that territory for its labor and or natural resources. Okay, that's like the most basic definition of imperialism. It also means that the dominated country controls that territory's politics, economy, and social life. And the domination of the territory is done through harsh military or economic tactics. We'll talk about some economic tactics in the very last lesson of this unit. So, here is a photo from the 1880s of a gold mine in South Africa. From this photo, what details show how the Africans were treated? All right. So I'll say this one more time just so we are all clear with it. Imperialism is when one country takes over another territory in order to exploit that territory for its labor and or natural resources. And that dominated country controls the territory's politics, economy, and social life. So you might think, like, wait a moment, Miss Corey, I feel like we have talked about imperialism like last semester into this semester, but just never really used the word imperialism. And you're exactly right. We've seen many countries and kingdoms and empires do this throughout history. This is not a new concept to humankind. So, examples throughout history of imperialism. Remember the Mongol Empire? And we talked about Genghis Khan. He'd be considered imperialism, right? Because he's taking over other people's territories, enforcing his government and his rules upon them. The Roman Empire, that's probably one of the most, right, like world renowned um, example of imperialism. Okay, so you have the Roman Empire based in Italy, spreading across all of this land you see highlighted here. You might think too, like, wait a moment, taking over someone else's land and controlling it? Yeah, the 13 colonies of the United States back when the British had it, that would be another example of imperialism. Or Alexander the Great, right? We talked about how he took over up here in Europe, through the Middle East, into India, and down through North Africa. That's also an example of imperialism. So you might think, imperialism, colonialism, how are they similar? How are they different? Well, I'll tell you, there's just a very fine line that separates the two. So, imperialism is the economic, political, and or social idea of taking over another country. So, it's an idea. So, when politicians talk about taking over another territory, when it's written into words, that's called imperialism. Colonialism, that is the physical building of colonies and the physical actions of dominating that territory. So that would be like sending people over to the land, building cities, building towns, building houses, making farmland. Or you can see here in this photo, killing off natural resources like elephants' tusks. That is colonialism. So, an example under British imperialism, the 13 colonies were built by the British in eastern North America. So, imperialism has happened throughout history, but for this unit, we're just going to focus on about the 1800s to the 1940s. We kind of dip in a little bit into the 1700s too, but not too much. So, there are two main reasons why imperialism started. First one, European competition with other European countries. And then we'll see too later on in like World War II, some Asian countries come into play too. Reason number two, social Darwinism. Okay, Europeans thought they were superior. So, competition. Early in the 1800s, slave trade was made illegal in European countries and the US. The US is kind of like a weird, like, exception to it, where it was illegal in the United States in the 1800s to bring in more enslaved people from Africa, but they could still have enslaved people in the continent, where in Europe, there was none of that. All the enslaved people were free. Then there were merchants that were looking for new commodities to sell. Okay, so they turned their attention to areas with smaller governments or no European influence. Examples, and we'll get into more of like the like detailed areas of what we're going to be talking about in Africa, Southeast Asia, India, Australia, and then later Latin and South America. So, European countries were also in competition with each other, right? You remember during the Napoleon videos that we watched? Napoleon and the British were in constant competition with each other. So, European countries wanted cheap labor. They also wanted expensive goods to trade because more money meant more power. They also wanted more land. They wanted more natural resources to exploit. You got to remember, in Europe, countries in Europe are not that big. They're maybe a little bit bigger than the size of Wisconsin or the size of Minnesota. That means they have really limited natural resources. So they want metals. They want copper, tin, gold, aluminum. They want rubber trees, which then rubber comes from that. Lumber, cotton, farmland, ivory, which is animal tusks, diamonds, and then opioids, which you'll learn more about in lesson 7. So, what happened is that resources were shipped back to the colonizers' European factories. Then the factories' workers would then make the final good. The government would sell it to the global economy, and that meant profits for European colonizers. So, an example of that would be Africans. They would extract rubber from rubber trees. Then the white colonizers would then send that rubber extract to their factory, such as in Belgium. The factory workers would then make it into water-resistant clothes, shoes, tires for bikes, and later on cars, and machinery belts. All right, another word that's going to pop up a lot is nationalism. And that is the belief that people's greatest loyalties should not be with the king or queen, but of the nation of the people through a shared common culture and history. So they believe that the country's common culture should be spread amongst the world. And this led to a lot of people wanting to go and settle in different colonies in order to spread their European culture with the rest of the world. You can kind of think of it like with the France, right? And we kind of talked about the Haitian Revolution, right? Because Haiti was once a colony of France. That would be an example of nationalism to spread like the French culture across the world. All right, then there is the other reason, social Darwinism. So we talked about this before last unit, but it is the false belief that some people were born better than others, making them superior. So those who are seen by society as being born into status and into wealth had better wealth and success, and they were just simply superior to others. Right? When I talked about how last time, how someone might just be lucky enough to be born into a good household that had some money. They would think that they're better than anyone else that was born with less money than they were. So, Europeans also falsely believed that their white races were superior to all other races in the world. And this is another concept called racism. And that is the belief that one race is superior to others. In European leaders and in wealthy minds, this belief was simply their justification to colonizing and exploiting Africans, Indians, Australians, and Asians in Southeast Asia. So European colonizers were literally like, I have a superior military, technology, and ways of extracting precious natural resources, so I'm going to colonize you. And the victims were like, screw you, Europe, we don't want your help. And the European colonizers were like, too bad. I want your goods and I want your labor. And then typically violence and oppression ensues. So here is a cartoon about the Spanish misrule in Cuba, according to the United States. This is an American cartoon. And it's kind of saying, like, America needs to come and rescue Cuba from the Spanish rule because the Spanish aren't doing anything for the Cubans. So that was kind of the justification why the US went into the Spanish American War. So, also, another aspect of social Darwinism is that Europeans believed it was their duty to colonize and modernize non-European territories. Like they like literally believed that it was like God's wish to be like, "Hey, you Americans, go out, go colonize non-European territories." But it was all in their heads. They were believed that Europeans were born with stronger bodies and they were just simply born smarter. So lots of false beliefs leading to imperialism. Here's another comic about imperialism. So actually this one includes the United States, right? I mean, you see the symbolism here of Uncle Sam holding the flag, blocking Spanish Cuba away from I don't even know who those are supposed to be. I think they're probably Spanish people. So literally showing that the US is like, this is my duty to protect other countries from these oppressors, although the US would go on to oppress them themselves. So, imperialism and technology. So, did territories who got threatened by imperialism fight back? Yes, they did. Okay. They didn't just go, oh, Europeans are here. Yeah, we submit to you. No, they fought back. Um, Especially, we will learn about the Zulu and the Boer Wars a little bit later on. Now, when these territories got threatened and they fought back, were they successful? No. The only one exception I could find was Menelik II of Ethiopia. He was the only example I could find of where he actually won against European colonizers. So why didn't these territories win against the Europeans? And that really lies within the European technology, that they had superior technology. So one of the big things would be the Maxim gun. That was invented in 1884, and it was the first automatic machine gun. You can see it here. They had it rolled around on wheels, but it was able to kill and inflict fear on a mass group of people. I mean, no one had ever seen something like this before. So if you rolled up with this and your opposing sides on the other side of this gun, they're going to freak out. So during imperialism, the steam engine also became very popular. So how would the steam engine be helpful to colonizers and exploiting the land and labor force? And don't say I don't know. Give me your best guess. How did the steam engine help with this? All right, so it was used to provide quicker transportation because it was used in things like trains and cable cars, especially cable cars for mining. So you can get down deeper into a mine faster, and also steamboats. That's going to be a really big one in Africa where there's lots of rivers. Europeans were able to navigate waterways upstream and downstream. Okay, right? Because it's really hard to paddle upstream. This way, steam engines could go ahead of the river's currents. They also built railroad tracks deep into jungles and forests, especially in places like India and Africa, and also to ship supplies to and from colonies. And if there were any uprisings, it could easily transport the armies. All right, so what to expect in Unit 13. So here's kind of our calendar. What you need to do next is imperialism in India, and then you're going to do imperialism in Africa. And then those are due at midnight. And then on Monday, we're going to do African women primary source reading. So you're going to read some accounts of women who were suppressed during the time of imperialism. And then on Tuesday, May 2nd, you are going to watch a video about King Leopold II, who was probably the most notorious colonizer. And then lesson 7 is going to be about the Chinese Opium Wars. And then May 4th is going to be about the US's role in imperialism. And then you will have your summative. Okay, but now let's talk about imperialism in Australia and New Zealand. You might like sit there and think, really? Australia and New Zealand had imperialism? They did. So, Australia and New Zealand, they were colonized by the British starting in 1788. So instead of the British being like, hey, natives, we're going to just like rule over you, they decided just to kill off as many natives as they could and kick them off of their land. Before the British came, there were approximately 650,000 hunter-gatherer natives called the Melanesians in Australia and 250,000 Maori natives who are fishermen and people who farmed in New Zealand. And the Melanesians and Maori settled in Australia and New Zealand about 40,000 years ago. So way before the British. So the Maori and the Melanesian were very vulnerable to European diseases, just like we talked about too in North America and South America. By the 1890s, there were only 93,000 Melanesians left and 42,000 Maori people left. So, who came from Britain to settle in Australia and New Zealand? The first British settlers were actually criminals. There were 736 convicts total, and 188 of them were actually women. In 1851, there was gold found in Australia, and just kind of like in the United States, there was a gold rush. So in 9 years, so in 1860, more than 1 million British and Chinese settled in Australia. Okay, so we went from about 900 people being the convicts to 1 million people. Wow. And by 1875, there were 2 million settlers in Australia and New Zealand. All right. So, why did these people come? Like, what did they want in Australia and New Zealand besides gold? They also came to trap animal furs, especially seals, to make top hats, like you can see up here. And also whaling. So sperm whales had many different uses, including oils for soaps, lamps, and perfume. And their bones were very like collapsible, like they're very bendable, that they actually would make women's corsets out of them. And it took about 3 months from England to get to Australia. So in 1897, the Aborigines people were forced into reservations. The British stripped their right to vote for office because they made like these crazy like voting rules where you had to read and write fluent English, and that made many Native people ineligible to vote. They did reserve 4 political positions for Aborigines in the lower house of the legislature, which isn't very much at all. And today, there are 8 Aborigines politicians on Australia's 227-seat parliament. So still not very much, but it's better. So Australia and New Zealand had unique relationship with Britain. Britain actually really encouraged them to make their own government. They're like, hey, Australia and New Zealand, we don't want to rule you forever. Like, we'll exploit your goods and stuff like that, but eventually you'll need your own government. So Australia created its own government in 1901, and New Zealand did the same in 1907. So today, I don't 100% understand how this all works, but Britain is still technically rules over Australia and New Zealand. They're called Commonwealth countries. There is no legislation in or from Britain saying that Australia and New Zealand were free from British rule, but Britain really doesn't have anything to do with Australia and New Zealand, and they don't interfere with any of their politics since World War II. Yeah, kind of crazy. All right, so here's the wrap up for today. Today we talked about imperialism, social Darwinism, colonies, nationalism, and imperialism in Australia and New Zealand. So next up, you're going to watch U13-L2 Ed Puzzle about imperialism in India. You're going to follow along with your study guide, and of course, if you have any questions, comments, or you simply want to learn more, please email me or come to office hours. All right. Thanks for watching. Bye.